Good evening and welcome to Carte Blanche, coming to you from our Johannesburg studio. The rate of child adoptions in South Africa has declined substantially, and the Department of Social Development in KZN is blamed for slowing down the adoption process in the province, leaving hundreds of children stuck in places of safety. Claire Mawisa has the story.
Makosi is a 5-year-old orphan growing up in a children's home. She's one of millions of South Africa's children whose stories are steeped in tragedy. One day, she hopes to be with a family of her own. How many successful adoptions have you had?
One.
And that one, you said the department wasn't very helpful. For 17 years, Asnith Tefo has run an early child development center in Midrand. Some of the children in her care are now matriculating, having spent most of their lives at this home.
When we started, it was a place of safety, meaning the kids were not supposed to be here for more than 6 months. Some of the kids were even at some point forgotten by the social workers. When you phone to say, are you remembering that these kids are still here? They would literally say they don't remember them.
There are an estimated 3 million orphaned or abandoned children in South Africa, with at least 1.2 million of them in potential need of adoption. Nationally, adoption figures have dropped substantially over the years, from 2,500 annually to 1,165 in 2016. And in KwaZulu Natal, the province with the most orphaned and abandoned children, there have only been 174 adoptions in the last 6 years. Robin Wolfson Foster, a child protection advocate, believes there's an adoption crisis.
The fact that those numbers are so low is extremely problematic. And they can only be low because those children are being cared for in impermanent relationships.
Busi and Sia were desperate to have a child of their own. 2 years ago, they approached the Department of Social Development in KwaZulu-Natal. They wanted to adopt a baby, but the social worker presented them with a 4-year-old girl.
We know in South Africa, we have a lot of children in need of adoption. There would be no reason to place an older child with a family who have specifically asked for a baby.
Robin believes the department acted unethically and should have disclosed to the couple that it was not accredited to process adoptions at that time. Did that social worker tell you that that child was ready for adoption?
She said we must foster her first, but at the end of 2 years, we must take her like our own child.
So after a year and a half of infrequent visits, Busi and Sia were able to bring their child home, and only then were they informed of the child's background.
Ngesikhathi i-social worker limthola mawakhe bembambe kanje ngomlenze edakiwe.
They also told them the child's abusive mother came from the same village and they would need to get her written consent. The social worker did not explain that fostering may be impermanent.
The social worker said they want to find the family first.
Many social workers feel the Department of Social Development in the province does not encourage adoption and will go to any lengths to reunite families first, says Mariki Stradum of the National Adoption Coalition.
The Department of Social Development, acting according to the law, will say family reunification should be of the utmost priority. There might be a variety of contributing factors. It might be substance misuse, it might be mental health difficulties. And these are the complexities that so much more conversation needs to be had around if we are going to act in the best interest of children.
We met with Noktula Kanyile, HOD of the Department of Social Development in KwaZulu-Natal, and presented the circumstances of the case to her.
I would love to hear from the social worker first what happened, because they would normally know where the child family of origin is before making permanent decisions. I don't think that they communicated to the social worker explicitly what they wanted to do.
Busi and Sia's story is not an isolated one. Families report they are afraid to speak out for fear of losing their foster children, and that these attitudes by the department dissuade them from applying for adoption.
If you look at their annual reports, They have a very high priority on family preservation and family reunification. They also have key performance indicators for how many children they place in foster care. In the last 2 years, they placed 64,000 children. However, there is no performance indicator for adoption.
Yes, we are preferring reunification. Families, it's the most primary unit to bring up a child.
In African tradition, blood relation and ancestral ties are paramount to our belief system. It is believed that out-of-family child adoptions are a foreign practice. Professor Sihaukele Ngubane heads up cultural studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal.
Amongst Africans, parenting is a collective. So we have a different point of view between Western and African. We believe that children come from our ancestors, and the non-kin adoption is a problem. What is acceptable is a kinship or a blood relative.
Traditionally, African culture integrates orphans into community and family, and legalized adoption is not common practice. The general low take-up of formalized adoptions was compounded when, in May 2016, the Department of Social Development in KwaZulu-Natal put out a memorandum that stopped child adoptions in the province. Justin Foxton, who runs a baby home in KwaZulu-Natal, says they have processed 0 adoptions since then.
Children were being literally left, their cases not moving forward at any great pace, even if they were adoptable.
We showed the HOD this memorandum and asked why there was ostensibly a moratorium placed on adoptions for 6 months in 2016.
This is not a moratorium. It's an internal communication of the department talking about withdrawal of delegations. We never stopped adoption.
But a withdrawal of delegations means that no adoptions took place as no panel sessions were held. Mariki Stradum says the reason the department gave was linked to suspicions of child trafficking.
There were allegations made that a family who had already adopted would have gone on to then have their children adopted internationally.
The family that were accused of child trafficking, they sent me an email to say that the department continues to pursue them, but they have, however, already been cleared by the Hawks and the Child Protection Unit of any wrongdoing.
When Nikki and Stephen Mepham applied for their inter-country adoption, they inadvertently found themselves caught in this stalemate. Now living in the UK, they had met as young doctors doing community service in rural KwaZulu-Natal. After undergoing a rigorous screening process, they were matched to a baby, Smangaliso from KZN.
His family had not been found. He was abandoned at birth. All that stood in our way of coming to South Africa to proceed with our adoption was the 239D letter required from KZN DSD.
The Department of Social Development is responsible for the 239D letter, which effectively permits a successful adoption. For social workers and adoptive parents, this has been the biggest hurdle in KwaZulu-Natal. Months went by, and repeated postponements for approval of the 239D letter led the Mephams to take their case to the South African High Court because their adoption continued to be opposed by the department.
Why they would not consent was that they wanted to attempt family reunification, despite the fact that that had already been attempted.
We have done a diagnosis of our own internal weaknesses, and we have identified that the people who were signing the Section 239 letters were not doing a proper interrogation and quality assurance.
The result of this extreme scrutiny was that only 8 adoptions were granted in the province in 2016, according to this department document presented to social workers late last year. But the HOD flatly denied that this was the case and insisted on referring to a different time frame.
When we look at reviewing our performance for the past 12 months, that is from September 2016 to date, 40 of the 53 applications for adoption, they have been successful. And that marks almost to 75% of the cases have been finalized.
Are you saying that only 53 people put through submissions to adopt in the province?
Yes, adoptions are not on high demand.
These 40 adoptions only address the period from November 2016 to date, and despite the HOD's assertions, when the department sent official figures to Carte Blanche days after the interview, they confirmed that only 8 adoptions were recorded before November 2016.
The department say that 75% of their cases have been processed. They're possibly not talking about all the others that are in backlog.
On request from Carte Blanche, social workers in KZN compiled statistics from their records from November 2016 to date. According to them, there were 129 applications for adoption as opposed to the department's 53. Only a 30% success rate as opposed to the department's 75%. On average, it's taking the department 6 months to finalize an adoption. Both the social workers and the department's figures confirm the smallest number of adoptions granted in the province are cross-cultural.
Once you send a child outside the culture, by law, the primary placement is for compatibility in terms of cultural background.
Although cultural identity is critical, there are children who could benefit from adoption, and Nikki and Stephen fought their battle in a court of law. In the High Court, the head of department finally conceded that a 239 letter is not required for inter-country adoptions. This set a legal precedent for further inter-country adoptions, and after 7 months of waiting, Smanga could finally have a family of his own.
Those 7 months were a time when Smanga could have been with a family, such a critical time in his development, part of the first 1,000 days, and he will never get that back.
A home has its own challenges. You know, it's a group of children living under the same roof, and that element of quality rearing of a child from a mom and dad is not there.
A simple moratorium for whatever practical reasons that is implemented is going to hamper a child's life for the rest of its life.
But the HOD's approach to adoption in KZN is clear.
From where I sit, there is no crisis. Adoption is not like the most popular and the most on demand compared to other forms of alternative placement.
But if adoption is not even presented to prospective parents like Busi and Sia despite their wishes, their newfound family will now be filled with uncertainty, and they may lose the child they have grown to love.
What are your thoughts on the adoption issue? Tell us using #CarteBlanche.